start of January 2020, the Icelandic government enacted a national pandemic preparedness plan almost 2 months before COVID-19 reached its volcanic shores. The remote island in the North Atlantic, home to just over 368,000 residents, is a hotspot for tourism, with close to 2 million foreigners visiting in 2019. But despite its popularity, Iceland continues to have a firm grasp on the virus, with 6,267 cases and 29 deaths as of recording this video. But the thing is, the country's economy relies heavily on tourism, and they recently announced how it planned to welcome back tourists from all over the world in the coming months. But with a third wave sweeping across continental Europe and some countries going back into lockdown, how does Iceland continue to keep COVID-19 at bay? So let's explore. And we are back for another one. I really wish I could keep these glasses on because it makes me feel more sophisticated. But can you see this? The blue, yeah. So we're back for another one. The light is, it's just changing so much, just going with it, you know? If you're new around here, my name is Andy. I make word explainers on this channel every Sunday. And recently we have been looking at a handful of countries that have seemingly done pretty well with handling COVID-19. If you want to check out the other videos in the playlist, you can click right up here by the globe and check them out. Today I want to talk about Iceland, a country I have never been to, but I will, and maybe sooner than later, and we'll get to that in a bit. So a pattern started to emerge with Asian countries that have successfully dealt with the pandemic, and that is that they were prepared because they had dealt with the SARS outbreak in 2003 and were therefore more well equipped than others at the start of the pandemic. And Iceland wasn't affected by SARS. In fact, the country went under the radar for many years. Tourism numbers in Iceland never really exceeded its low population numbers, but over the last decade those numbers have risen astronomically. And I mean, you only need to look at these images to understand why it is so appealing. Okay, so they weren't hit by SARS, but COVID-19 wasn't the first pandemic to reach Iceland's black sand beaches. In October 1918, 2 ships carrying pandemic influenza docked in Reykjavik's downtown harbour. Within 6 weeks, 2/3 of the capital city's inhabitants were infected with the virus. Where measures to reduce community spread were introduced in the northern and eastern parts of Iceland, there was an apparent absence of the disease. This taught epidemiologists that acting fast and isolating the disease was an effective way of tackling the outbreak. And just over a century later, the Icelandic government was in a better position at tackling a pandemic.
You all have been credited with really managing this crisis very effectively.
It's important to put your ego as a politician aside, learn really from those humble scientists.
Hard to tell if the outbreak of influenza affected their decision making, but in January of 2020, they had a plan in place for when COVID-19 would eventually hit their shores.
The first case was discovered in Iceland at the end of February, and a week later we have 37 confirmed cases.
They decided from the start that they would use isolation, quarantining, and contact tracing to tackle the virus. As part of the plan, they started testing citizens in early February. And by the 13th of March, Decode, a genetics biopharmaceutical company based in Reykjavik, began screening the general public and was able to take over as much of the hospital testing as possible. Today, any resident with the mildest symptoms can be tested. Iceland also quickly focused on early social distancing measures and a ban of assemblies of more than 20 people. Now, Iceland clearly benefits from having a small population and a lot of space. And the most densely populated area in Iceland is the southwest corner, with around 70% of the population living in the Reykjavik region. They originally restricted unnecessary travel, and again, the size and population played to their advantage in testing. The test and tracing teams have tracked the health of every single person who tested positive for COVID-19, sequenced the genetic material, and screened more than half of the island's population for infection. Analyzing that data so quickly led to some of the earliest global insights about how coronavirus spreads through populations. The data showed, for example, that almost half of infected people are asymptomatic, that children are much less likely to become sick than adults, and that the most common symptoms of COVID-19 are muscle aches, headaches, and coughs. And this was crucial information that was really needed at the start of the pandemic. So from acting fast and thorough testing and through introducing an effective tracing app, Iceland managed to do a pretty effective job of tracking the virus across the country and didn't need to resort in a strict national lockdown like a lot of other countries did. A similar approach to what we saw in Singapore and Taiwan. But remember how I mentioned the influx of tourism to Iceland in the past decade? Well, that now makes up 33.8% of the country's GDP. In other words, Iceland needs to reopen its borders to foreign nationals because if it doesn't, the country could go bankrupt without tourism. So on the 15th of June, Iceland opened its borders to non-essential visitors from 31 European countries. And a month later, on the 16th of July, also lifted restrictions on visitors for 12 more countries. The number of visitors remained low, but the opening did give a boost to the struggling tourism industry. And then we get to August. In August, a pair of tourists arrived at Reykjavik airport, tested positive for coronavirus, and ignored the regulations and went into town. And that incursion led to a small bump in cases. And then in mid-September, the cases rose abruptly from 1 to 55 within a week. And by October, coronavirus was more widespread in the community than it had been during the first wave. On the 17th of October, the number of active infections finally began to decline. But despite the outbreaks, the country continues to keep its borders open for tourism. Although entry requirements are now a lot stricter, travelers must either self-quarantine for 14 days or participate in 2 screening tests, one on arrival followed by 5 days of quarantine and then a second test. But as of the 6th of April, Iceland announced that all travelers, regardless of origin, are welcome to visit Iceland if they have either a certificate of full vaccination against COVID-19 or a certificate of previous COVID-19 infections. Now, I haven't been vaccinated yet because they haven't hit my age demographic, but my girlfriend has because she works for the NHS, and I last year had COVID-19. And does that mean if we wanted to, we could go to Iceland this summer? But these travel rules and restrictions are being updated regularly, like they're changing week by week. But it is possible that new cases will continue to arise. But it appears it's a case of carefully balancing the scales. On one side, you have their strong approach to combating the virus and being thorough with testing and tracing and quarantine, and the public trust in this system is strong. And on the other side, opening up the country in the safest way possible to tourists to prevent the country from financially collapsing. Okay, thank you guys so much for watching this video, another installment here on the channel. I'd love to know what are your thoughts on what's happening in Iceland. Have you been to Iceland? Perhaps you have, and would you consider going right now given the circumstances if you physically could? I'm gonna put the glasses back on for the outro, and you're just gonna have to deal with the blue light that looks like eyeshadow around my eyes. So if you're new around here, thank you for watching, making it all the way to the end. Like I said at the start, my name is Andy. I make travel explainers on this channel every Sunday. Everything from the origins of samba to why tourism is sinking Venice to how running affects your mental health. And the goal for the year is to hit 10K subscribers. The best way that you can help support this channel is by hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already subscribed. This is a much longer outro than normal, but thank you for watching, stay safe, and I will see you guys in the next one.